The grand metropole ballroom smelled of expensive perfume and old money. It was a sea of champagne flutes and silk ties, a celebration of 30 years of marriage for Nancy's son Julian and his wife Tinsley. At table 12, tucked near the kitchen doors where the waiters rushed in and out, Nancy smoothed the fabric of her dress. It was a simple navy piece bought off the rack for $40. At 60, with her silver hair pinned back in a severe, practical bun, she looked less like a guest and more like a retired librarian who had wandered into the wrong venue. She was neither, but silence was a habit she had worn for decades, and tonight it was her armor. Across the room, Tinsley held court. At 38, draped in a custom Vera Wang that cost more than Nancy's first car, she possessed a voice that was calibrated to carry just a little too far. She was the senior marketing director at Chelsea Rice Mills, a title she wore like a crown. To Tinsley, Nancy wasn't family. She was a stain on the curated aesthetic of her life. "Oh, look at her," Tinsley whispered, gesturing with a flute of champagne. The surrounding guests chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering. Tinsley pointed a manicured finger toward table 12. "My mother-in-law, bless her heart, she looks like she wandered in from a bake sale. I told Julian we should have bought her something decent, but you know what they say, you can take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the bargain bin out of the girl." Nancy's grip tightened on her water glass until her knuckles turned white. She heard it. She knew she was meant to hear it. She looked at her son. Julian stood beside his wife, studying the tips of his Italian leather shoes. He didn't speak up. He never did. Somewhere along the way, he had learned to fear Tinsley's sharp tongue more than he respected his mother's quiet dignity. "Nancy," Tinsley called out, sashaying over with her entourage in tow, "are you enjoying the salmon, or is it a bit too high-brow for your palate? I know you usually prefer things out of a tin." The group erupted in polite, cruel titters. Nancy looked up. Her blue eyes were calm, but they held a depth that Tinsley, in her shallow cruelty, wasn't equipped to navigate. "The salmon is lovely, Tinsley," Nancy said, her voice soft but steady, "but perhaps a bit over-salted, much like the conversation." Tinsley's smile flickered, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second before hardening back into place. "Humor, how quaint. It's a shame your bank account isn't as sharp as your tongue, Nancy. It must be exhausting, living on that tiny pension, watching us live the life you could only dream of. I suppose that's why you're so quiet. Poverty has a way of silencing people." The insult wasn't just about money. It was an attempt to strip Nancy of her humanity in front of the very people Tinsley was desperate to impress. Tinsley leaned in, her cloying perfume suffocating the air between them. "Just try not to embarrass us when the CEO arrives. I've worked too hard for this promotion to have a frumpy relative ruin the aesthetic." A cold, familiar fire ignited in Nancy's chest. For years, she had kept her business life firewall separated from her family. She had wanted Julian to love her simply for being his mother, not for the empire she commanded. But looking at Tinsley's sneer and Julian's cowardly silence, Nancy realized her humility hadn't been a lesson, it had become a cage. She checked her watch. 9 p.m. In 10 minutes, the mystery owner of Chelsea Rice Mills was scheduled to make a surprise appearance. Tinsley didn't know that the Chelsea in the company name wasn't a location. It was Nancy's middle name. The board had been begging her to step out of the shadows for months, and tonight she was finally listening. "Tinsley," Nancy said, standing up. Her posture shifted instantly. Gone was the grandmother, replaced by the Titan. "You should be careful about who you deem silent. Sometimes people aren't quiet because they have nothing to say. They're quiet because they're deciding if you're worth the breath it takes to ruin you." Tinsley laughed, a shrill, mocking sound. "Ruin me? With what? A knitting needle? Don't be pathetic, Nancy. Go find a cookie and sit down."
She turned her back, dismissing Nancy as if she were furniture, and walked toward the stage to claim her glory. She had no idea she was walking off a cliff. The house lights dimmed, shifting the room's energy from festive to anticipatory. Tinsley took her place near the podium, adjusting her diamond necklace. Her eyes held a predatory gleam. Rumors had been swirling for weeks. The founder was coming. Tinsley was convinced that if she played her cards right tonight, she'd be in the C-suite by morning. She glanced back at table 12 one last time. "Watch closely, Nancy," she mouthed, smirking. "This is what real power looks like." Nancy didn't flinch. She simply smoothed her skirt, the dress she had chosen specifically for its invisibility. She watched Julian, who was busy networking with Tinsley's colleagues, completely ignoring her mother, sitting alone in the dark. Grief, sharp and genuine, pierced Nancy. She had raised Julian on values of hard work and integrity, but the glitter of Tinsley's world had blinded him. He didn't know that his house, his car, his prestigious job, they were all fruits of a tree Nancy had planted. He was living on an allowance from a trust fund fueled by the very company his wife worked for. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies' voice boomed, "to celebrate a 400% growth this year, our founder has decided to step forward." Tinsley leaned to a colleague, whispering loudly, "I've heard the founder is a ruthless shark, probably some iron-fisted woman from London. I can't wait to show her my portfolio." Nancy stood up. She didn't head for the exit. She began walking toward the stage. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Tinsley hissed, grabbing Nancy's arm as she passed the front row. "The restrooms are the other way. Stay out of the light, Nancy. You're ruining the photos." Nancy looked down at the hand on her arm. The touch was the physical manifestation of 10 years of condescension. "I'm just going to where I belong, Tinsley," Nancy said. Her voice dropped an octave, shedding its soft lilt. "You belong in a rocking chair," Tinsley snapped, shoving her. "Go hide before you make a scene. This is a night for winners." Nancy didn't respond. She kept walking, slipping behind the heavy velvet curtains where Arthur, her CEO and confidant, stood waiting with a garment bag. "They're ready for you, Nancy. Are you sure? Once you step out there, the quiet life is over."
"The only place I have left," Julian said. "The office. Not as a VP, as a supplicant. I'm going to see if my mother has any room left for a son who forgot how to be one." The headquarters of Chelsea Rice Mills was a monolith of glass and steel that overlooked the harbor, a building Tinsley had walked into every morning with the swagger of a queen. Today, Julian stood before the revolving doors, his reflection looking back at him like a ghost. He wasn't wearing his usual $3,000 bespoke suit. He wore a simple navy blazer and khakis, an outfit that felt less like fashion and more like a penance. The security guard at the desk, a man Julian had walked past hundreds of times without so much as a nod, stood up straight. "Mr. Vanderbilt." "I'm sorry, sir, but your badge has been deactivated." Julian felt the heat crawl up his neck. The lobby was full of people he used to lead, people who were now carefully looking at their phones to avoid eye contact with a falling star. "I'm here to see my mother, the chairperson." "The chairperson is in a board meeting, sir. She left instructions that you are to wait in the public lobby." For 3 grueling hours, Julian sat on a hard granite bench. He watched the world move on without him. He saw Tinsley's former subordinates walk by, whispering behind their hands. The Vanderbilt name, which had been his golden ticket, was now a brand of shame. Upstairs, in the executive boardroom, the atmosphere was clinical. Nancy sat at the head of a mahogany table that could seat 40. She looked immaculate in a charcoal suit, her silver hair shimmering under the recessed lighting. Surrounding her were the top legal minds in the country, and Arthur, her loyal CEO. "The forensic audit is clear," Arthur said, sliding a tablet across the table. "Tinsley didn't just embezzle, she sold proprietary marketing data to our biggest competitor, Grain Corp. She was planning to jump ship the moment she secured her performance bonus next month." Nancy stared at the data. It wasn't the money that hurt, it was the betrayal of the company's soul. Chelsea Rice Mills wasn't just a business, it was a legacy built on the trust of families. "And my son?" Nancy asked, her voice low. "Was he involved in the data leak?" "No," Arthur sighed, glancing at a stack of signed memos. "He was just oblivious. He signed whatever she put in front of him. He was a vanity hire, Nancy. He spent more time on the golf course than in the ledgers." Nancy closed her eyes for a brief second. A vanity hire. Her son had become a decorative ornament in the very empire she had built for him. "Bring him in," Nancy commanded. When Julian entered the boardroom, he felt the shift in gravity. This wasn't Mom's kitchen. This was the war room. Nancy didn't stand up. She didn't offer him a seat. "You lived with her, Julian," Nancy said, skipping the pleasantries. "You slept beside her. How did you not see that she was hollow? How did you not see she was bleeding this company dry?" "I loved her, Mom," Julian whispered, his voice cracking. "No," Nancy corrected him sharply. "You loved the way she made you feel. You loved that she did the dirty work of being ambitious, so you could play the part of the refined heir. You traded your mother's respect for a woman who saw you as a trophy with a bank account." "I've left her, Nancy," Julian said, taking a step toward the table. "I walked out this morning. I told her I'm done." "You left her because the ship is sinking, Julian. That's not character, that's survival." Nancy stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city she had helped build. "Tinsley is being served with a civil suit for $20 million in addition to the criminal charges. Since your names are joined on every asset, you are effectively bankrupt." Julian's breath hitched. "Everything?" "Everything," Nancy said, turning to face him. Her expression wasn't one of malice, but of a surgical coldness. "I am stripping you of your title. I am stripping you of your salary. If you want to be a Vanderbilt, you will start where I started." She reached into her desk and pulled out a small laminated badge. It wasn't for the executive floor, it was a worker's ID for the distribution centers. "There's a loading dock position open at our distribution center in the valley," Nancy said, sliding the badge across the table. "Clock-in is at 5 a.m. It pays $20 an hour. You'll live in a studio apartment the company provides for junior laborers. You will work there for 1 year. If you miss a single shift, or if I hear you've used my name to get a table at a restaurant, you are cut off permanently." Julian looked at the badge. It was a long way from the penthouse. "And Tinsley?" Julian asked. "Tinsley is currently being booked," Nancy said. "And the best part, Julian? She tried to call you for bail, but I've already frozen the joint accounts. She's finding out what it's like to be poverty-stricken in a very real way." The door burst open. Arthur looked pale, his hand trembling as he held his phone. "Nancy, we have a problem. Tinsley isn't at the precinct. She posted bail. Someone else paid it." Nancy's eyes narrowed. "Who?" "Grain Corp," Arthur replied. "The competitors. They're not just protecting their mole, they've hired the most aggressive firm in the city to sue us for wrongful termination and character assassination." Nancy leaned back, a dark, predatory smile spreading across her face. "So she wants to play the corporate war game. Good. I haven't had a real fight in 20 years. The news of Grain Corp's intervention hit the financial markets like a tidal wave. By noon, the headline on the Wall Street Journal read, "Rice Clean versus the Corporate Mole. A family feud turns into a billion-dollar border war." Tinsley hadn't just slunk away into the shadows. Backed by Grain Corp's legal war chest, she appeared on a midday news segment, looking carefully humbled but defiant. "I was a loyal employee for years," Tinsley told the camera, her eyes glistening with fake tears. "But Nancy Vanderbilt is a woman of another era, a woman who uses her wealth to crush anyone who threatens her ego. This is a personal vendetta by an embittered woman." Inside the glass fortress of Chelsea Rice Mills, the board was panicking.
"The optics are terrible, Nancy," one director argued, pacing the length of the room. "She's painting us as a dinosaur. Our stock is dipping. GrainCorp is positioning themselves as the saviors of a persecuted talent." Nancy sat at the head of the table, slowly peeling a small orange. She didn't look like a woman under siege. She looked like a predator watching a moth flutter to a flame. "Let her talk," Nancy said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "In fact, Arthur, I want you to leak the restricted folder to the press. Not the embezzlement files, the product files." Arthur blinked. "The product files? Nancy, that contains the patents for the climate-resistant grain we've been developing for a decade. If GrainCorp gets their hands on that—" "They already have it," Nancy interrupted, tossing a piece of orange peel onto the table. "Tinsley is a marketing person, not a scientist. She stole the beta version of the grain. What she doesn't know, and what GrainCorp is about to find out, is that the beta version has a built-in genetic kill switch. It grows beautifully for exactly 45 days, and then it withers into dust. I designed it that way specifically to catch a corporate spy." A heavy silence fell over the boardroom. Julian, standing in the corner in his loading dock uniform, felt a chill go down his spine. He realized he had never truly known the woman who raised him. "You're letting them plant a crop that's destined to fail?" Julian asked, his voice hushed. "I'm letting them stake their entire spring acquisition budget on a lie," Nancy said, looking at her son. "Tinsley promised them the future of agriculture. They paid her bail and a $5 million consulting fee based on that promise. When that crop fails, GrainCorp won't just fire her, they will destroy her to recoup their losses. They are far more ruthless than I am." "But the lawsuit? The character assassination?" "That's where you come in, Julian." Nancy turned her icy gaze toward him. "Tinsley is holding a press conference tonight at the plaza. She expects me to show up with my lawyers, but I'm not going. You are." "Me? Mom, she'll eat me alive." "No," Nancy said, stepping closer and adjusting his collar with a touch that was surprisingly tender yet firm. "You're going to give her exactly what she wants. You're going to walk into that room and hand her a signed confession. You're going to tell the world that everything she said about me is true, that I am a controlling, frumpy old woman who tried to ruin her." Julian stared at her. "Why would I do that?" "Because," Nancy whispered, "it's the only way to make sure she stays exactly where GrainCorp can see her. We're going to give her enough rope to hang herself, Julian, and you're going to be the one to hand it to her." Julian took the confession from his mother's hand. It was a lie that would ruin his mother's reputation in the short term, but he saw the endgame. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Tinsley. "Julian, I know your mother forced you into that warehouse. Meet me at the plaza before the press conference. I can get you out. I can get us everything." Julian looked at the text, then at the confession in his hand. He had a choice: follow the mother who was teaching him the brutal reality of power, or return to the wife who offered him a comfortable lie. The Plaza Hotel was a shark tank. Camera crews blocked the entrances, and the air hummed with the electric tension of a public execution. Tinsley sat in a private suite upstairs, her confidence restored by the $5 million advance GrainCorp had deposited into her office.
The morning sun rose over the Greenwich estate with a cruel, indifferent brilliance. Usually, this was the hour Tinsley spent in her marble-tiled yoga studio, sipping an organic green juice and checking her social media engagement. But today, the silence of the house was punctuated only by the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of heavy boots on the hardwood floors. Movers, hired by Vanderbilt Holdings, were systematically tagging every piece of furniture with color-coded stickers: green for company property, red for items purchased with diverted funds. Tinsley sat on the edge of her king-sized bed, her Vera Wang gown from the night before crumpled on the floor like a dead skin. She was dressed in a simply tracksuit, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Across the room, Julian was frantically stuffing clothes into a duffel bag. "We have to go to her, Julian," Tinsley whispered, her voice rasping. "We have to apologize. She's your mother. She can't actually send me to prison. It was an oversight, a bookkeeping error." Julian stopped packing and looked at her. For the first time in their 7-year marriage, he didn't look at her with adoration. He looked at her with a clinical, detached exhaustion. "An oversight, Tinsley? Arthur sent the files to my personal email this morning. You didn't just divert funds. You created a network of fake vendors. You bought that diamond necklace with money meant for the regional distribution centers." "I did it for us," she shrieked, jumping to her feet, "to keep up appearances. Your mother is a billionaire, Julian. What's 400,000 to her? It's a rounding error." "It's not about the money," Julian said, his voice flat. "It's about the fact that you stood on that stage and called the woman who built everything a frumpy country girl. You didn't just steal her money, Tinsley. You tried to steal her dignity, and you did it while I was standing right there." The doorbell rang, a sharp, mechanical sound that made Tinsley flinch. She ran to the window. A black sedan was parked in the circular driveway. 2 men in charcoal suits, not movers but investigators, were stepping out. "Julian, please," she begged, clutching his arm. "Call her. Tell her I'll give it all back. Just don't let them take me." Julian looked at his phone. There was one message from his mother. It wasn't a reprieve. It was a link to a news article already trending in the financial sector. Chelsea Rice Mills founder steps out of the shadows, announces major internal audit and leadership purge. "She's not taking calls, Tinsley," Julian said, pulling his arm away. "She's taking inventory." Downstairs, the front door opened. The lead investigator walked into the foyer. He didn't look at the art on the walls or the expensive rugs. He looked at his watch. "Mrs. Vanderbilt," the investigator called out, his voice echoing up the grand staircase, "we have the warrants for the digital records and the physical assets. You have 30 minutes to vacate the premises before the forensic team begins the deep dive." Tinsley collapsed against the doorframe. This wasn't a family drama that would blow over by Thanksgiving. This was the systematic dismantling of her identity. She grabbed her phone and tried to dial Nancy's private number. It went straight to a recorded message. "The number you have reached is no longer in service to you. Please direct all inquiries to the legal department of Vanderbilt Holdings." She deleted me. She didn't just fire me, she deleted my entire existence. Julian zipped his bag. He didn't look back at the woman he had let dominate his life for a decade. He walked past her, his footsteps heavy. "Where are you going?" Tinsley cried out. "I will," Julian said. He turned to the cameras. "Tinsley has been working with GrainCorp to launch a new line of climate-resistant seed. She's told them it's the future. She's told them she has the secret formula." He leaned in closer to the microphone. "But what she hasn't told them is that she never checked the soil chemistry logs. If she had, she would have seen that the beta seed she sold them is designed to fail in exactly 45 days. And since GrainCorp has already signed contracts with 5 major governments for the spring planting, they are currently holding a $4 billion time bomb." The silence that followed was deafening. The GrainCorp executives in the front row turned a shade of white that matched the tablecloths. Tinsley lunged for the mic. "He's lying! He's just trying to save her!" "Am I?" Julian asked, pulling a second document from his pocket. Not a confession, but a forensic lab report. "This is the real data, Tinsley. The data you were too arrogant to verify because you were too busy picking out furniture for your new office. You didn't steal the future. You stole a booby trap." The GrainCorp CEO stood up, his face contorted with rage. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at Tinsley. "Is this true? Did you give us a contaminated strain?" I Tinsley stammered, her gaze darting to the confession in her hand. She realized too late that the paper Julian had given her wasn't a confession at all. She looked down and read the first line. "To my dear Tinsley, a marketing degree is no substitute for a science degree. Enjoy the fallout." As the GrainCorp security team began to move toward Tinsley, Julian stepped off the stage. He walked past the chaos, past his screaming wife, and straight to Arthur. "Tell my mother I'll be at the warehouse at 5 a.m., Julian said.
Actually, Arthur replied, handing him a new keycard, she said if you survived the plaza, you're grounded from the warehouse. You have a board meeting at 8 a.m. We're starting the acquisition of Grain Corp. Now that their stock is crashing, we're buying them for pennies on the dollar. But as Julian reached the exit, a hand grabbed his arm. It was a man in a trench coat, a federal agent. Mr. Vanderbilt, we need to talk about your wife's offshore accounts. It seems your signature is on the transfer for the Grain Corp consulting fee. You're under arrest for corporate espionage. The cold snap of steel against his wrists felt like a bucket of ice water over Julian's head. As the federal agents led him through the lobby of the plaza, the camera flashes, once the heralds at his status, now felt like the strobe lights of a public execution. The world was watching the Vanderbilt heir being dragged away not as a titan, but as a criminal. Behind him, Tinsley was a whirlwind of frantic, ugly noise. It was him, she shrieked at the cameras, her practiced poise discarded like trash. He signed the authorization forms. He was the one who moved the money. I was just a subordinate following my husband's lead.
Tinsley.
Nancy sat in the dim light of her mahogany-paneled study, her only company the wall of monitors displaying the live chaos. She watched her son being pushed into the back of a black SUV. Her face remained a mask of stone, but her fingers, resting on the edge of her desk, were trembling. Arthur stood in the doorway, a long silhouette against the hallway light. The paper trail is brutal, Nancy. Tinsley didn't just forge his name, she manipulated him into signing internal memos that were in reality wire transfer authorizations for the Grain Corp payouts. On paper, Julian is the mastermind. Tinsley is just the wife who got caught in the crossfire. She used him as a human shield, Nancy whispered, her voice a low vibration of grief. Even at the end, she was hiding behind the boy I raised. If he goes to trial, he's looking at 15 years for corporate espionage, Arthur said softly. I have the legal team ready. We can bury the evidence. We can make those memos disappear before they hit the federal database. But you have to give the word now. Nancy looked at a framed photo on her desk, a young Julian smiling and sun-drenched holding a trophy from a childhood debate match. He had always been so eager for approval. That was his fatal flaw. He had sought it from a woman who viewed him as a liquid asset. If I save him now, Nancy said, standing up and walking to the window, does he learn that my shadow is big enough to hide all his sins? Or does he finally become a man when he has to pay the price for his own blindness? Nancy, Arthur warned, this isn't a shift on the loading dock. This is a federal penitentiary. I know, she snapped, turning around. Her eyes were hard and bright. Call the Department of Justice. I don't want the evidence buried. I want a meeting with the lead prosecutor. If Julian is going to be saved, he's going to save himself. I'm not buying his freedom. I'm going to make him earn it. The next morning, the visitors' room at the Metropolitan Detention Center smelled of industrial bleach and hopelessness. Julian sat behind the plexiglass, a dark bruise blooming on his cheek from a scuffle in holding. When Nancy walked in, he couldn't even lift his head. I'm sorry, Mom, he choked out, his voice thin. I told her they were tax forms. I didn't read them. I trusted her. That is your crime, Julian, Nancy said, her voice devoid of pity. Not the money. The fact that you outsourced your conscience to a woman who viewed you as a trophy. You signed away your integrity one memo at a time. She slid a single folder against the glass. The prosecutors want Tinsley, but she's a ghost. She's hidden the $5 million in a series of offshore accounts we can't trace. They need the encryption keys, and they need the testimony to prove she acted with malicious intent. You are the only person who can bridge that gap. If I testify against her, Julian said, his hand shaking on the table, she'll go away for life, and I'll still have a record. You will have a suspended sentence and 5,000 hours of community service, Nancy corrected, and you will lose your inheritance, every penny. I am donating your trust to a scholarship fund for the children of the farmers who actually grow the rice we sell. Julian looked at his mother. The frumpy woman was gone. The merciless CEO was gone. In her place was a mother performing a radical surgery on her son's soul to save what was left of it. "And what happens to you?" Julian asked, leaning closer to the glass. "I'm stepping down," Nancy said. "The GrainCorp acquisition is final. My work is done. I'm moving to the farm in the valley, the real one, not the estate." Julian picked up the pen to sign the cooperation agreement, but as he scanned the final page of the evidence file, his breath hitched. He looked at the chemical digital signatures on the offshore transfer logs. "Mom," Julian whispered, leaning closer to the glass, "the encryption key for the GrainCorp payout, the underlying signature isn't Tinsley's, and it isn't mine." Nancy froze. "What are you talking about?" "Tinsley didn't have the clearance for the high-level servers," Julian said, his eyes wide with a new kind of terror. "This signature, it's a master-level override. There are only 2 people in the company with that code." Nancy's heart went cold. She didn't need Julian to say the name. She already knew. "Arthur," Nancy whispered. The man who had been her right hand for 30 years hadn't just been helping her trap Tinsley. He had been playing both sides, using the family war to mask his own heist. "He didn't just help me destroy her, Julian," Nancy said, the realization dawning with sickening clarity. "He used the chaos to steal the crown for himself, and right now, he's the only one with the keys to the kingdom." The revelation hit Nancy like a physical blow, yet she did not stagger. For 30 years, Arthur had been her shadow, the architect of her logistics and the keeper of her secrets. She had trusted him with the empire because she thought he shared her vision of a legacy built on substance. She hadn't realized that while she was playing the long game of character, Arthur had been playing the long game of greed. "He's not at the airport, Julian," Nancy said, her mind spinning with the cold precision of a grand master. "Arthur is too smart for a commercial flight. He's at the private airfield in Teterboro. He has a Gulfstream fueled and ready. He waited until Tinsley was the perfect scapegoat, and you were behind bars to make his move." Julian looked at his hands, then at his mother. The betrayal by Tinsley had broken him, but the betrayal by Arthur, the man he had viewed as a second father, ignited something new. It wasn't the desperate rage of a spoiled heir. It was the focused fire of a Vanderbilt. "Mom," Julian said, leaning against the glass, "the encryption key, if his signature is on it, it means he's linked to the shell company that received the GrainCorp payouts. He didn't just steal your money, he stole the proof that Tinsley acted alone. He's carrying the only evidence that can clear my name." Nancy stood up. She didn't call her lawyers. She picked up her burner phone and made one call to the head of Teterboro Airfield Security, a man whose daughter's medical bills she had quietly paid 10 years ago. "This is Nancy Vanderbilt," she said, her voice carrying over the whine of the jet engines. "Ground the Gulfstream on Hangar 4. Mechanical discrepancy. Do not let it taxi. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The airfield was windswept and desolate under the midnight moon. Arthur stood on the tarmac, a leather briefcase handcuffed to his wrist, watching the ground crew circle his jet. His face, usually a mask of corporate calm, was tight with anxiety. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness. A modest 10-year-old sedan pulled up, the car Nancy used when she wanted to be invisible. Nancy stepped out. She wasn't wearing